Hello, and welcome to Ed-PR, the podcast that brings you the hottest trends in education from the best teachers around the country. Ed-PR is brought to you by Learnerator.com.
Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us on this second episode of Learnerator Ed-PR. Today, we're going to be talking about standards-based grading with Joy Oettel, who is the department chair at Hume-Fogg High School, the #1 ranked high school in Tennessee. Joy is also our literature director at Learnerator. Joy, do you want to kind of tell our listeners a bit more about what you do here at Learnerator, as well as kind of your position at Hume-Fogg?
Yes, I'm I'm the director of literature, which means that I'm helping to develop kind of this new venture of Learnerator, which is very exciting. So our ultimate goal is to write really quality multiple choice questions that deal with commonly taught text, questions that dig deeper, that really are going to challenge students and provide a good foundation for analysis style questions that are really going to help as rigor is increased in classrooms due to National Common Core standards.
Pretty much our goal is to create better questions than what you can get on SparkNotes and challenge kids.
Yeah, that's a better way to say it, probably. Yeah, it's like really quality questions that teachers can see as tools and as even assessment tools, and then they can use to help with their classrooms instead of kind of feeling like they have to fight, like we do with SparkNotes sometimes. Yep.
And what about at Hume-Fogg?
I've been at Hume-Fogg for about 8 years now. I'm the department chair. I teach English 1 and also journalism. We have a really talented group of teachers and students at our school. It's a really great place to be. It's intense because we have very high expectations for our students and also ourselves. But it's a wonderful place to teach because we really can, dig deep in analysis, and we can have some really stimulating conversations about literature, even at the English 1 level. So, and then all of our, it's a very AP-driven school, so all of my students are pre-AP students.
Got it. Thank you for explaining. So why don't we kind of jump into the quote that you selected to kind of frame today's discussion. Simplify, simplify, simplify by Thoreau. How does this apply to your teaching, and why did you pick this?
Well, this quote really sums up more of my aspirations rather than my actions. A lot of times it's something that I strive for but struggle with. The Transcendentalists have been heroes of mine for years, all throughout college, and I got to go to Walden last November and kind of visit the sacred ground at Walden Pond. But I just think, and in life too, but we kind of let the intensity get to us sometimes, and it's important just to remember at the end of the day what's important, the literature and my students for me, and if I'm having a good day with both of those things, then I've done my job, but especially, in education and teaching, it's really easy to get bogged down in a lot of the bureaucratic stuff, and so I am constantly trying to refocus on what's most important, so.
Yeah, that's great, and on our first podcast, the teacher mentioned bureaucracy as well in her teaching, so I think this is a great reminder, both in life as well as teaching, that you really just have to boil it down to its most basic elements and focus on that. So,
exactly.
Ironically, we're talking about something that's a bit more complicated. So the topic of the day is standards-based grading, which is essentially taking the old school grading method of A, B, C, whatever percent on a subject or a test, and making that more complicated by breaking it down into standards and skills. Anything you want to add to kind of framing what standards-based grading is before we jump into how this applies in the way that you teach English?
Well, I think it's a very different way of looking at it, and I think it's overwhelming for some people because you're having to completely shift the way you view grading and instruction. But once you get the hang of it, I think that teachers will find it's really a more streamlined process. So part of it does fit in with my quote in a way, which hopefully I'll be able to share that today.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get to that in the course of this conversation. So why don't we just dive in, and I'll let you kind of drive the car from here on out, and I'll just follow along and ask questions.
Okay, cool. So if we look at, well, let's just take a look at the standards-based grading slide that compares to traditional grade book to a standards-based grading grade book.
Sure.
The one reason I was really on board to making this transition, even though I knew it was a somewhat controversial kind of method, was because there were problems with the old style of grade book. He thought, and we make our grade books based on how we're taught, when we're in grad school or what our mentor teacher teaches us. But if you think about it, like, why do we even do it that way? These are really arbitrary assignments. When it says homework 1, quiz 1, that really doesn't communicate to the student, or the parents or the teacher, what exactly that student is falling short with, if they get, a poor score on that. And the appeal of standards-based grading, if you look on that side, is you're narrowing it down by specific skill, or if you're in a more content-based class, you could do it by that. And so it's really clear when you look at it, I can tell right there what each student is having a problem with. And you kind of just take that method and use that as the foundation. But the best way to think about standards-based grading doesn't even start with the grade book. It starts with how you think about your curriculum and how you break it down into the standards.
Okay.
So let's go to the next slide, applications in English. And I start out talking about my framework, and that really is the foundation. So you kind of can throw the grade book out the window until you focus on your framework. Mm-hmm. And so this happened really organically, and I did this with one day during the summer. I met with a couple of other teachers, and that's something that I really encourage if you want to incorporate standards-based grading in your class. Get lots of collaboration and help. I mean, it's something that needs to be done through the collaborative process, ideally.
And what if...
But go ahead.
What if at your school there's not much of this done and there's no other teachers that know how to help you? Are there any good online resources and kind of websites or whatever that may be helpful for a first-time teacher?
There's professional literature out there. The author's name escapes me, but there's, standards-based grading has really kind of caught on in the past few years, so it shouldn't be too hard to find some professional resources out there for it. But it's, there are even some amazing YouTube videos that you can find that talk about school districts adopting this. So it's basically if you just take it upon yourself to try to find some information, it's out there. But hopefully more school districts will provide support for teachers, because it's the kind of thing that teachers really need support with. Because it is so different from what we've done before.
Well, we can add some resources into the show notes, so no problem there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, and that was another reason I really wanted to have this talk, is because I think it's great, and I think it's something that teachers could use more support with. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so back.
Do I still have you?
Found them, and we decided, what, based on these standards, are the main skills that we need to make sure that students leave our classroom really solid with. Mm-hmm. And we happen to break that down into 6 core standards, and that's the foundation. And for our course, it spirals. So we, like for example, essay writing is one of ours. Well, obviously in an English class, you're going to continue to do that throughout the year. So retakes, if you will, are kind of built in. There are no individual retakes, because each student automatically retakes through continual practice and assessment of those same course skills. But we're also looking for development of those throughout the year.
Okay.
So if we go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get your framework, you build your assessments around that, and a 3-point scale. We decided on a 3-point scale, but that depends on, what each individual teacher wants to do. There's a lot of professional freedom with standards-based grading. And so, for example, if you're an AP teacher, it makes sense for you to use a 5-point scale. It really just depends on how you want to look at assessing mastery.
Okay.
So if we go to the next slide, this is the framework that I was talking about. And I developed this with my English 1 colleague, Emily Moore. And we have our 6 skills there, and we rated them according to, again, we use our professional judgment. What do we feel is the most important? And then you'll see in the middle column, those are the kind of assignments we give as practice to help students develop those skills. And then those summative assessments are over there on the right. So essentially what goes into the grade book is every single practice assignment goes in there, and they count towards the student's 9-week average. But then, so let me give you an example. Okay, so let's look at essay writing.
Sure.
Of course, we're going to have some benchmark assignments, and they'll write thesis statements and outlines, and we might practice some grammar to help with writing. And every time a student does that grade goes into the grade book, and that's a projection of that student's grade.
And so, what's a
skill at that point?
What's a benchmark assessment? And so these 6 categories, are they pulled directly from Common Core? Did you kind of massage it and kind of make your own broad buckets based on Common Core? What was the process to get here?
The best way to think about it is we chunked the Common Core standards.
Okay, that's what it looked like, yeah.
It's easy to do because the standards are so broad, and but they still allow for depth. So, and a lot of it, honestly, is just, you instinctually know as an English teacher what you need your students to be able to do.
Right.
So you just kind of use the Common Core standards as the foundation for that. But a benchmark assignment would be like, I'm not going to tell my students, like, okay, write this essay, and it's due in 2 weeks. I'm going to give them small steps and scaffolding along the way. So a benchmark assignment would be like, okay, now you need to turn in your thesis statement so I can give you feedback on that. And of course, the upper grade levels, they need less of that scaffolding, but rarely to the teacher that I just say, okay, turn in this essay, because it would probably be horrible anyway. You have to help them along. So they have all those practice assignments, and those are going into the grade book. And then when they turn in their final paper, I'll grade that, and I'll put that in the grade book. But that summative assessment is their grade. That's their 20% of their course. So then I'll go back in the grade book and multiply all of those previous practice assignments leading up to it by 0. So it's still showing up, but what's left standing as their grade is the essay. And that's because, it's all about making sure the grade reflects how well the student has mastered that material. And the essay is kind of the culminating demonstration of how well they've done that.
Right, and then they shouldn't be surprised by it because they've been getting benchmark assignments along the way in terms of what the final score. Right. And then, so in terms of teaching these 6 buckets, do you prioritize them in a certain way? Do you order them? As in, do you work on vocabulary first and then move on to other things, or do you do some of these in parallel with each other? How do you sort of structure a course through a year, kind of working on all these things?
Well, a lot of them are so related and go hand in hand. Obviously, if you have required more vocabulary, you're going to be a better writer and so forth. So we don't really worry about going in any certain order. Right now we're reading both a nonfiction text and we started reading short stories. So it's all just kind of woven based on timing and need. I never really think about doing things in a certain order, and it changes throughout from each grading period.
Got it.
Okay. Let's go to the 3-point scale on the next slide. And again, this is something that teachers can determine for themselves. And I call it a 3-point scale because I like to think of something, if I'm assessing a really easy to say, okay, this student has met or exceeded the expectation, or they're meeting it, but it's not, quite as sophisticated or complex as it could be.
Right.
And then, like the one would be just bare essentials. But sometimes, especially when you're grading like fully subjective written assignments, you're going to feel the need to kind of split hairs a little more than that. So sometimes we'll extend it into this like 2.5 and 1.5. But I still like to call it a 3-point scale because just in my mind, I like thinking of it in terms of 1, 2, and 3. So, and over here on the right, you'll see like how we kind of calculate that according to the traditional 100-point scale. I mean, I wish on transcripts we could put like a 3 or a 2, and that would mean something to colleges. But I know that that's not the case, so we have to adapt it to that scale.
Right.
But the beauty of the scale is that it changes. So like a 1 out of 3 right now in the year will allow a student to pass with a 70. But in January, I expect them to be better at analysis than they are now. So in January, the scale will change, and a 1 out of 3 will be a 60 out of 100, because that's no longer. If you're still only at level 1 in my class, then that's not a passable grade. Okay, so if we go to the assessment slide, I'm basically just saying we set up. It's not just about how I'm grading. It's also about how we are presenting material and how we're assessing. So you have to get it all aligned. So when I make a test for literary elements, let's say, I'll say, okay, level 1 is defining a literary term. So tone, for example, like what is the definition of tone? Level 2 would be identifying it in a new text. And we present students with an entirely new text they've never read before, because it's important to isolate that skill specifically. If I'm testing them on a text that we have read and discussed together, well, they can just regurgitate everything that I told them about tone in that story, for example. But if it gives them a completely new one, they have to really demonstrate their skill in identifying tone.
Okay, this makes a lot more sense, because previously I was looking at the scale and it was really a 6-point scale, right? But now when you tie it back to the assessment levels, this actually makes a lot of sense, because this is how we do it at Learnerator too, with easy, moderate, and difficult questions. So I can definitely see how it all kind of comes together with the assessments.
Right, and it really does tie in with Learnerator as far as we can see it the same way. Like if a student can answer questions on To Kill a Mockingbird on Learnerator, but only answer the easy ones. Well, it's easy for a teacher to say, okay, they're at level 1 right now. That'll give them a 70 in the class or on this assignment or whatever, But all the time we're striving for that level 3. So on the assessment, it would be analysis, which is like, I tell my students all the time, like that's what we're always aiming for. So if they get a 3 out of 3, that means they can really analyze how tone is developed and how it works within a text.
Yep.
Okay, so if we go on to, but my note about assessment formatting, like this is so much better than the traditional method, because, and I ask my students this at the beginning of the year when I'm explaining why I grade this way. If your friend has a 93 on the test and you have an 86, well, what does that tell you about what your friend can do that you can't?
Right.
And they say, well, nothing, But if I say your friend made a 3 out of 3 on the test, you made a 2 out of 3, what does that tell you they can do that you can't? And they say, well, they can handle it. I can't yet, And so it's just so much more communicative to students, and it helps us to be able to target where they need help.
And
that's kind of the beauty of it.
Do you feel like this makes students more confident? Because I feel like with the normal assessments, it's if someone gets a 95 and you got an 86, they might just think that, oh, I'm not as smart as them, because they have no way to actually break it down, right? But if they have this breakdown, then they can see, oh, if I just improve this one thing, I could, get a 95 as well. It's really not me being smarter or dumber, right?
Perfect. I mean, and there's like this kind of like when people think of studying, like this elusive, like, oh, he knows how to study, but I don't know how to study. But what does that really mean? What are you doing when you study? And it does kind of take the mystery out of it for students, and it makes everything way more transparent. And that's one thing that I noted on the next slide with the takeaways was, like with the second one, I started really feeling like standards-based grading was working and benefiting my students, because they would come up to me and say, with the test, they just come back and say, what do I need to do to improve my analysis skills? Or can you help me with analysis? Whereas before, it would be that frustrating conversation of, why did I get an 88? Or, and
Right.
And that's when the shift goes from this number, to a real focus on learning. And that's like what we want, of course, in a classroom. And it kind of comes down to something like grade grabbing too.
So, real quick question that this made me think of. If you're switching from traditional grading to standards-based grading, what kind of software is needed, if any, to make that work? Meaning, it's much easier just to track an A or a B or a C or a 95%, but once you start having like 6, skills to track against, how do you automate that to kind of keep your sanity on different assessments?
Well, that's been kind of a challenge, because, most schools use an online grade book, and we do too, and that was probably the toughest part, is just figuring out how to get my grade book set up so that this would work out. But we figured out, unfortunately, like, you have to just convert everything to the traditional 100-point scale. So, like, in my grade book, I'll have it, like, when I get a test back to students, it's always out of 3, because I'm thinking in those terms. But until, grade books catch up with that, we'll just have to continue to convert, which really, isn't really that bad.
Okay, so pretty much you're keeping track manually, and then you have to convert it to a traditional grade book.
Right. So like when I put grades in, I have to put in 100, 80.
Got it.
That is something I really wish would catch up. And maybe it will, or maybe we'll find another way around it.
Okay. Do you want to just wrap up the other 2 takeaways then? Because I think you just talked about the second one.
Yeah, so, well, and just kind of one of the main reasons that we do standards-based grading is because I feel like it's a really authentic grade. So before I did standards-based grading, if I looked at, we actually pulled made pie charts over grade breakdowns, and it would say, 21% of your students got an A this time week, for example. But I really can't tell you why all of those students got A's. Some of them got A's because they just are good at doing homework, or but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can analyze better than that kid who got a C. Maybe that kid who got a C is brilliant, but he is just, really not into doing the work, which we want students to do the work because it helps them. But I just kind of started questioning, like, why are we putting all of these other factors into a grade? Shouldn't their grade just say, like, or communicate, like, how well they know the material and nothing else? And I think we kind of have to let go of some of those hang-ups about, why a student should get an A. If a student can analyze in my class, then I can make it an A. And the standards-based grading really kind of strips all that down into a more authentic grade. And then the third one, because some people struggle with this, well, since they know homework, like, doesn't count, and I can't, like, give air quotes over a podcast, but, they get hung up on the doesn't count, then they won't do it. But what I found is if you communicate to students and they see a clear connection between the homework you're giving them, and they truly see it as a direct connection between their summative assessments, then they see the value of it and they're more likely to do it. The ones who don't do it, there's a good chance they wouldn't have done it in a traditionally graded classroom anyway, because you just always have the students. But I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that if you're linking your homework and, all your practice assignments to your summative assignments, and they see the connection, there's more buy-in from students.
Right.
And it also helps to kind of I shed a lot of the old assignments that I used to give because I realized this really isn't working towards the ultimate goals I have for them. I don't need this anymore. So it kind of helped to purge a lot of that unnecessary stuff.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm sure teachers out there will love anything that will help their students do more homework, especially if it's not just rote memorization or kind of beating them over the head with repetitive things, but if it's linked to the summative assessments, as you said, they'll be more motivated to get it done.
Right, let's just make everything meaningful and
Yeah.
we'll get more buy-in. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I think this has been a really helpful discussion. I didn't know much about standards-based grading before this, but now I feel like I have a good grasp of it, and I'm sure that a lot of teachers will benefit from this. Why don't we move on to the rapid fire round where we kind of ask you some more personal questions and kind of get your take on them?
Okay, great.
All right, first one. What is the best teaching advice that you've ever received?
My professors in grad school said, be flexible, and I remember that every day. You just never know what's going to happen, and you have to be able to think on your feet, so that one's important.
Great. And then, what is a personal habit that you've developed that you think has helped you be more successful as a teacher?
Well, I'm really organized. I get made fun of because of my desk always being really neat and clean. But also, I just work really hard, like all teachers do. And I think, if you're going to be successful in your classroom, you just got to be willing to work like a dog. and that's the teaching profession. And that's the ultimate thing you have to do, is be flexible and just be prepared to work a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure between all the meetings and all the stuff we have you doing at Learnerator, teaching and leading a department, if you're not organized, you're definitely going to go insane pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah, you'll totally drown.
Let's see. What is your favorite teaching resource? So it could be a website, could be a book, whatever that you found has been most helpful to you that other teachers should know about.
Well, one thing, I don't know if it's my favorite, but one thing that I'm really enjoying using, that it's been around for a while, but we've really started to use Turnitin.com more. And,
Okay.
And I like that because, I don't know, but sometimes people view it as just this punitive thing, but it's really got a lot of really helpful tools for students, and I love how I can grade things really more efficiently and effectively, and give them really great feedback on papers, and do it more efficiently. It cuts down on the grading time, but I'm still able to give them meaningful feedback. So that's what I'm really liking right now.
Yeah, I remember that from my high school days. It's probably gotten a lot better since then as well.
It's got a lot of features, like peer review features and stuff. So it's more than I think a lot of people realize it is.
Yeah, I'll probably check it out as well after this. Last question. Let's say that you wake up one day and now you're the principal of your high school. What's the first thing that you would do?
Well, our principal actually does this, and I would continue it, but I think it's really important for teachers who teach common classes or grade levels or in departments to have common planning time, because I just think collaboration among teachers is so important, and teaching can be such an isolating profession, and that's really a shame. And if a principal will make sure that teachers get time to collaborate within the school day, it just, everyone benefits, because collaboration helps teachers grow more and share ideas. And I know I'm a better teacher for collaborating with my colleagues. And then it just makes sense to cut down on the workload too, for just a very pragmatic reason. But I would definitely make sure that my teachers have time together, because it's really important.
That's fantastic. Joy, you've done a great job today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and schedule to talk to us about standards-based grading. I will say that as we wrap up, any of our listeners, if you have any questions or comments, please send us an email at hello@learnerator.com. And if you're an English teacher, check out our literature subjects that we're putting up on Learnerator right now. We have 3 books up, and we have 3 more on the way very soon this fall, and Joy has been doing a fantastic job leading other teachers to develop this content, and we believe it's going to be a tremendous resource for any teacher teaching these kind of classic books who wants more advanced assessments for their students. And we're aligning the Common Core, we're aligning the standards, and so I think it all kind of ties very neatly. So Joy, thanks again for first and foremost doing a great job at Learnerator and at your school, and secondly for doing this podcast with us.
Thanks, it's been really fun.
All right, stay tuned for next episode where we're going to talk about college admissions essays and how to master them.
You've been listening to Ed-PR, your one-stop shop for all things ed-related. Want to join the conversation? Write to us at hello@learnerator.com.